This week on the Milk Making Minutes, you will hear a story of a breastfeeding do-over. You will hear Katherine tell a completely vulnerable story of feeling immediate anxiety from the moment her first child was born. Severe breastfeeding pain added to the postpartum anxiety, and despite how painful it was emotionally, she was unable to continue breastfeeding. When Katherine became pregnant again, she was worried she would have a repeat of her first situation. Many of us who struggled to feed a first baby are so familiar with the sense of dread about, quote, failing again. Listen to hear how Katherine's second breastfeeding experience brought a change in perspective about what she experienced the first time. Do you need a change in perspective for your own experience or someone else's? What would it take to bring more compassion to the way you tell your own stories about breastfeeding? When I began breastfeeding, I was blindsided by how difficult it was. I may have thought I was prepared, but having known only a handful of people who had ever breastfed and only seeing it up close from a couple of them, I had a huge learning curve. Since then, I've become a doula, a lactation consultant, and a childbirth educator. I'm your host, Lo Nigrosh, and I welcome you to the Milk Making Minutes, where we explore breastfeeding experiences through the lens of systemic barriers so that you know your breastfeeding struggles are not your fault and your triumphs really are the miracles you feel they are. Hi, Katherine. Welcome to the Milk Making Minutes. I'm so glad you're here.
Hi.
So take a minute to introduce yourself before we get into your breastfeeding story.
Okay, I'm Katherine. I have a 6-year-old. He's going to be starting first grade, and a 4-year-old. I work from home, and I work for the federal government, and so I have a lot of flexibility, which is nice to spend time with the kids.
We really know each other, although we have not seen each other really in years. We used to be part of the same moms club when our kids were younger.
You came and helped me out a little bit when I first got home with my youngest.
That's true.
Yeah, because I had some issues with latch. So that was nice. But
yeah, great. Awesome. Okay, so before we actually get into your breastfeeding experiences, what was your exposure to breastfeeding and baby feeding before it was your turn?
So my mom breastfed both of us till we were like 2.5. I know she talked very highly of it and sounded like it described how it was this great bonding experience. So for me, I knew I really wanted to. It's interesting because I know supposedly my mom's almost 70. So supposedly I thought at that period of time, it wasn't as pushed because I was born in 84, but I know that she talked very highly of it. And so it was something I really did want to do with both my kids. I mean, ideally, so.
Yeah. And did you have any peers who had breastfed?
Yeah. So my neighbor, I know she was breastfeeding, and with my first, she had given me the name of a lactation consultant because when I had issues with my first with painful latch and whatnot. But I'm trying to think if I had too many other friends. I guess not really now that I think about it.
Yeah. So you had not really seen it up close and personal.
No, not really.
Okay.
No, now that I think about it. We had taken the breastfeeding class through when I was pregnant, and it helps my husband got to learn too about it. He's like, oh, I learned a lot, and just it helps some, I think, having some information about what it really looks like versus what you think. And so, but yeah, I don't think I'd ever seen it anyone personally doing it, I guess.
Okay. And that was through your hospital? Where are you?
Yeah, we delivered St. V's. So I know they had classes there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so then did you set any goals for yourself while you were pregnant? Or were you someone who just wanted to see how it went?
I mean, I kind of want to see how it went. I knew that I guess enough women, I've heard stories of struggles. And so ideally I wanted to try to do it as long as I could, but I also kind of knew that there might be challenges.
Because the impacts the birth can have on breastfeeding are well documented, I ask every person on the Milk Making Minutes to briefly share their birth story. Katherine shared a story I hear so many times from guests of the show and from clients. It's a story that, while common, highlights a systemic barrier to breastfeeding. When birthing in large hospital systems, decisions are often made based on policy and not on the health of the individual and their baby. Katherine was overdue and her membranes were stripped. She believes this caused her water to break, which required her to be admitted to the hospital, although she was not contracting. Her efforts to get contractions going on her own weren't working, probably because she was in the unfamiliar setting of a hospital, and then made the decision to go on Pitocin, based on the suggestion of her care providers. She tried to continue pain management by being mobile, but the continuous monitoring required by the hospital kept losing signal. So, frustrated, she decided to stay stationary, and the pain became unbearable. She opted for an epidural. Her baby was born after many hours of labor and 2 hours of pushing. This is what she had to say about what happened next.
When I finished delivery, I had this sudden, real intense anxiety. And I remember having feelings of I don't know how to describe it, but I was sort of just let someone else take care of him. I don't know. I think I didn't realize at the time, but I had these intense panic feelings. And of course I wanted, we were very happy about this pregnancy. It was very planted, very wanted, but I think it was this intense feeling. So I think that definitely complicated things too. I did breastfeed the entire time I was at the hospital. But as time went on, it was very painful. And I started having cracked bleeding nipples. And so that made it hard because every time he's nursing, was I wanted to, and I knew it was really important, but it was just okay, this is really painful. And then my psychological state wasn't great either. So the birth was good, I guess you could say. I think everything was fine there, but afterwards was, those few days in the hospital where I know were tough.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like the birth was fine. It also sounds like, though, you maybe had some feelings that you wished it had gone differently.
Yes.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but,
Yeah, no, I mean, in the new world, I think a lot of people feel this way, I would have maybe been able to do things a little bit differently, but, I the Pitocin thing, they kind of threw me off. So the fact that I thought, okay, my water would break and I'd just go into labor and I'd be all good. But of course, I basically got induced more or less. So it is what it is. But And
I think, it's important for us in the world of modern birthing practices where, you said that people asked you what you wanted to do, but I think often that asking doesn't feel like asking. You kind of said they asked, but I kind of knew it's what I should do. In a lot of those conversations in the hospital, it often doesn't feel really like it's your choice. And I think that can lead to higher rates of postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety and a feeling like you lost control early on.
Yeah.
And I think it is important to acknowledge that, yes, we're so happy we have this healthy baby. And yes, we're so happy that, in the end, it ended up okay. And it's okay to say, in looking back, I can see the points at which I wish it had gone a little bit differently.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I still feel guilt. And so I always say that I wasn't I didn't have the version of birth where I was happy he was out. I was more relieved just to be done with labor, and maybe a lot of people feel it too. But I was just I was happy, but I didn't have this overwhelming. People talk about this overwhelming love, and I definitely did not have that right way. I mean, I think bonding took time, but I didn't it's always hard when the association with him a lot of times was pain, because it's okay, this kid wants to eat all the time and it's painful. And I was just trying just to and you're trying to figure out, is this normal? Is this something you're sort of there's supposed to be some sort of adjustment time. But I know that it was really painful. The lactation consultant that came to the hospital, I don't know if they don't diagnose them or if they don't look, but they didn't look at his mouth at all.
Right.
And then later on, we found out he did have a tongue tie and a lip tie, which, obviously I think was messing with the latch and how
It was.
Yeah. So, right. So that was hard. Like I was also like worried too. I was like, am I doing this right? I kept thinking, am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? And the lactation goes all in that with the hospital was sort of like, it looks fine. I'm like, okay. I told her it was really painful, but you have this doubt too of like, is this right? Like, am I doing this right? Am I wrong? I don't know. And it's, is this supposed to be normal? It was not. And then you're already having like, other postpartum feelings anyway, and you're just beyond exhausted. It always cracked me up when they would come in and, they'd check you or whatever. They'd have, afterwards, and they kept telling you, get some rest. I'm like, how am I supposed to get some rest?
Right. You keep waking me up.
The baby's wanting me, like, of course. I mean,
Right. I'm trying to get some rest. This baby.
no, you can't. It's really very much.
And you keep waking me up. There's like two things going on here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's really not helpful when someone keeps telling you it looks fine. You look fine. Everything looks fine. And they're not listening to you saying it's not fine. Or you feel like you can't speak up and say, but it's not fine. Because if an expert, quote unquote expert, is telling you it's fine, everything's good, then you think, well, she must know what she's talking about. She helps people do this all day, every day.
Yeah.
And so then it becomes a matter of, can I trust my body that's telling me this isn't working when somebody else is telling me, no, it looks good.
Right. Yeah. That was the hard part because I was like, I didn't know. And it kept going, is like this feeling of guilt too, of like back to me, like I'm doing it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not doing it right. It felt like I was doing what I was supposed to do and trying to make sure like, that what I know this big thing of just trying to make sure like you get enough of like the nipple in there and whatnot. But it still felt like, okay, it hurts really bad. Like, is this supposed to be like, is this right? Yeah. Is this normal? Is this? And yeah, I mean, I'm not drowning people at the hospital, but it's like, maybe they're just too busy. And I just didn't feel like I wish I could have gotten better support, like maybe from the minute, from birth. And also like I even told the nurse, I said, because I didn't know exactly how I was feeling at first. It was only an hour or two after delivery. I remember just had this panic feeling. And she's just like, you're fine. You just need to get some sleep.
Ugh.
And because you're sort of like, is this right? Like, why you don't trust your own feelings? So you're like, well, why am I feeling this way? Like, I didn't realize till later on. I was like, oh, that hormone rush. That makes sense. I did feel, she will say she was like, okay, I'll take him for like an hour or something. She took him and we at least got like an hour of sleep because I think we'd been up, it was 2 days at that point, we didn't really sleep when I was in labor. So, but I think it's just that all that together is just, it's tough. I didn't really fully realize I was dealing with postpartum until probably like 6 months in. So when I kind of had a little bit of a breakdown, I remember I didn't sleep for like a full week. And I think it's just everything going on. My period started like not that long after. So I think that like messed me up. Like my hormones really just messed me up like psychologically. And then I remember like I didn't sleep for a week and I eventually like went to the doctor and like broke down and was just like crying. Be like, I'm a bad mom. And he's like, you're just dealing with postpartum depression. It's like, oh, so like getting on medication, I had gone on antidepressant that did help, but I had gone off of it to conceive my daughter. And I remember going in and I was feeling better and going into her birth, I was worried about those things. Like, okay, is it going to be really bad again? Is it going to be, and I told my provider, like, okay, this is what's going on. She said, well, okay, I have your prescription ready. You could start your meds again after you had her. And I did have some similar type feelings at the hospital again, but it seemed like they faded easier. And I had an easier breastfeeding experience that maybe did help with, I just didn't have the same feelings. And I think maybe just like being prepared, I guess, for like, okay, that's a possibility. And what's going to be like when we get home. Like, I think that did help.
Right. Now, Katherine, which doctor did you go to at that 6-month point and break?
So I had discussed it the 6-week appointment. She gave me the name of a counselor. I think I talked to her once and I told her some of my feelings of probably anxiety because I had this guilt of like, I was struggling with breastfeeding and I felt like I wasn't able to give him as much as I wanted to. And she was basically like, well, what's the big deal? I don't know. She was a lot. But I was like, okay, like maybe it's not that big a deal, like in the like grand scheme of things. But like I felt like intense guilt and that was all involved of like not feeling like a good enough mother. So I think I kind of tried that. It kind of got better some and then it got worse. Like it kind of went back and forth. And I was like, I kept telling myself, I'm fine. Like I'm okay. I reached out to my primary care doctor and he's pretty good. And I trust talking to him. I guess I didn't realize until like after birth that like how insane the hormones are and and I'm definitely very sensitive to it because I've noticed like big hormone changes for me really induce anxiety, stuff like that. So like, I just didn't realize like how bad it can be. And if you're dealing with like, I don't know, breastfeeding stuff and other things on top of it.
Right. Which is all hormonal, right? Breastfeeding is
exactly.
It's controlled hormonally too. So that can really impact it. Now, let me ask you, when you went to that counselor, was that counselor trained or specialized in perinatal mental health?
Probably not.
Okay.
I honestly don't remember. I just remember like they gave me some name of somebody, but I think she was basically like, oh, well, like whether this is right or not, I don't know. But she was like, the baby gets basically the most benefits in the beginning. So like, if you've done that, you're good. Like, and I was sort of just like, whether that's true or not, like that was important to me.
The breastfeeding relationship, it is a part of motherhood. And some people, they know they want to formula feed from the very beginning and it's fine. And they do that and they don't struggle as much because that's a choice they made from the beginning for whatever reason. But people who are saying, I'm struggling with this, we need to believe them. We need to believe that they're struggling and validate those feelings and help them feel okay.
And it's hard too when like people like my mom, when I eventually just kind of had to go to formula, I think she got it to a point, but it was like, not exactly. It's not just like, oh, I just didn't feel like trying. I felt like I tried as much as I could. And I still had intense guilt about it when I finally had to throw in the towel. But like, it's hard, when people don't understand that it's not the same for everybody.
Right.
Right. And so when I got home with him, we were still dealing with a lot of that pain. The lactation consultant came to see me. She tried different positions and whatnot, and it was still pretty painful. She'd given me these like nipple shields to sort of just let my nipples heal because they were so like cracked and sore. And she's like, you should probably go see
pediatric dentist. Yeah.
Yeah. So she's like, okay. So we got an appointment with that. He did have, I think, a time lip dye, and he got that fixed. And I was hoping like once that got fixed, everything would be great. But I don't know. It's just like, it's never seemed like it worked. Even after he got that tongue tick fixed, it was kind of painful. What?
Did you see the lactation consultant anymore?
I'm trying to remember. I think I did.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was just sort of like relying on the shields. And I think that might have messed up my production because I know that's like probably not, like they're not getting that direct contact. And then I remember like it just so the bad timing. We all came down with a stomach bug when he was like 6 weeks. And I remember he was wanting to feed a lot. And I just like, I felt like I wasn't, at the time, it felt like, okay, I'm not producing enough. Like he would try to, like, he would nurse and then he would seem like he wanted more. So then that kind of cascaded into like, okay, he was getting more bottles that way. And then he was also very particular, I remember, about like the position and where we could nurse. Mm-hmm. And I felt like it was trying to do it upstairs in our bed, and it really wasn't where it was just like, it had to have the couch and the position in a certain way. It was like, okay, so I still tried, but like at nighttime, that was the other thing too. Me and my husband did shifts because at first I was like, okay, I'll just suck it up and deal with it. But like the lack of sleep, I know like.
Yeah. Especially if he went at bed.
Yeah. And so it was just sort of like, okay, well, we'll just, at least that's something. I would try to sleep for a chunk of time. But I know like, and even the lactation consultant brought this up and I was like, what do you want me to do? Like, she's like, well, that's going to mess up your supply. I'm like, I get it. I mean, I wasn't able to nurse as much as I should at night, but it was like, okay, well, I need to be able to function. And this was like making it at least so that we could just do the shifts for a while. And we did that for a little bit. But I think just like all those things put together with the latch stuff and the anxiety and the not brushing it, like, and then it just like eventually he's like, I would try to like, I got to a point where it's like, I would try to nurse. And he was like mostly on pause. Like, I was still hoping like, okay, we just keep nursing. Maybe we'll like, get there. He was like, was around 4 months, I want to say. He just kept pulling off and kept like crying. And I'm like, well, maybe I don't have enough. And maybe at the time I should have just like reached out again. But I was just sort of just like, okay, maybe it's just not going to work.
Yeah.
And I remember like, yeah, that last moment, because it's like, I think that's also too like the finality of it. Like, once you stop, it's probably you're done for. Like maybe you can like bring that back or so whatever, but it's probably difficult to do. So I sort of knew that it was like that finality of it. And I was just like, when do you finally just say no? And I think I remember trying to pump some, but then even then that was like not super convenient. So it was just like, it's okay to like be done and he's to be on formula. But it did feel like, especially I think my mom romanticizes breastfeeding as this greatest thing ever. And it is great, don't get me wrong. And I was very sad just not happy to have that. And like, and I felt like, oh, you're giving him something inferior or whatever. And I know at the time, I think I was just doing what was best for me, like, for my own mental health and everything. But I remember that moment being like, this is tough. And no one fully understands that. Like my husband got to a point, I know he realized that like it was important to me. He tried to support me as much as possible. But like nobody really understood how like I kind of felt. And it's just like my mother-in-law, she did formula too. So she didn't get it really either of like, okay, well, yeah, the baby's fine. Everybody's fine. But it's still like something you wish you would have been able to do, be able to have that experience.
Yeah, it's a loss.
For sure.
You grieve the lost experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even though you have a healthy baby.
Right.
Do you love to read about pregnancy, childbirth, and breastfeeding? Are you looking for books to help you become a more confident parent? Or perhaps books to help you understand what went wrong with your breastfeeding journey or to do better next time with breastfeeding? Or do your kids have questions about breastfeeding or pregnancy, but you don't really know how to answer them? Would you prefer to have a curated list on these topics? Go to the link in the show notes to my new affiliated bookshop. Every purchase you make benefits the Milk Making Minutes. But better than that, these books are vetted. I've read them all, and I feel very confident recommending them to you. I'll be adding to them continuously, so go to that link when you want to purchase a book. It will help the show, and you can feel confident it will be a purchase you will enjoy.
You mentioned that he was very particular about position and location. Is he still kind of a picky guy? I always notice patterns like that. We think, oh man, what's going on with this baby?
Yes. That's interesting. Yeah, no, yeah, that is kind of true. He's always been my serious kid. Yeah, he's kind of particular about certain things. And he was always like, he was one that always wanted to be held, and which is, I liked being able to do, but it was hard sometimes. My daughter was more adaptable. Mm-hmm. And I think if I had that experience first, I could see being one of those people that are like, well, what's the big deal? Like, I really do see that like different kids, different experiences, different psychological state, like it really does, make a difference.
And I could see you going into your second pregnancy more scared.
Right. Yeah. You feel so alone. It's tough. I mean, I will say at least, I did, my neighbor, I remember talking to her at one point and being like, that was the other thing too, is like, everybody's like telling me how cute he was and how adorable. And it was like, and I think in my mind just wasn't there or whatever, because I was just thinking about like, he's cute, but he cries and he doesn't let me sleep. And I remember feeling like that way, or just feeling like these feelings you have. It's like, you almost feel guilty just admitting it. Cause it's like, there were times where I was just like, can he just, can someone just take care of him? Like, and it's terrible, but it's just like, that's sort of like, I remember feeling a lot more of like, everybody's like, oh, he's so cute. He's like, supposed to have all these warm and fuzzies. And I was just like, I'm just exhausted. And that was the other thing too. It's like, I don't think you're fully ready. Like, I knew I wanted a baby. Of course, we wanted to start a family. We were ready in all like other ways you could think of, but I don't think you really fully realize how much they need you. And especially if you're trying to breastfeed, like you can't even go to the bathroom for 2 minutes sometimes without them crying and wanting you. And that was hard, just feeling like I can't even put him down for a minute. I can't even have any type of space myself. And that adjustment to being able to do whatever you wanted when you were childless.
So then with your daughter, tell me how it went from the beginning.
She was fully induced because I had gestational diabetes and they induced me at like 39 weeks. But even with that, I mean, the birth was like pretty low key. Like it was, I got an epidural, and because I kind of knew that like with the Pitocin, I'm just like, I kind of first started early on thinking like, okay, it's probably going to happen. She was fine. You know, she came out a lot easier than my first. It was like nothing at all, like a few pushes. So it was, which was nice. You know, I had to worry about 2 hours worth, and then we got immediate skin to skin. But I will say I've had the same feelings of anxiety, and probably actually worse in the sense of like, I couldn't keep her at night. It was like 2 nights where she just had to go to the nursery because I was not in an okay enough state to like be able just to sleep or do anything. And I remember just so anxious. And then I felt guilty from the get-go of like, oh, here we go again. Now she's going to get formula, and now she's not going to breastfeed. But I think once we got home, it got better. Maybe just things were going a little bit smoother in general. Like, so I just seemed like the anxiety got better, and I had a feeling of like, okay, I can manage this. And she did have like, I remember it was like, she was kind of painful a little bit, like depending on the position. That was also another thing I was worried about. I was like, okay, does she have a tongue tie? Is it going to be the same problem? But it seemed like that subsided. And then once that did, like she was fine with nursing, and she was just a lot easier. And I was very grateful for that because I remember thinking, okay, well, you know, I can do this. And she would nurse, and then I could, you know, put her back down, and she would at least go back to sleep. Usually she's like, yeah, as long as she was nursing, she'd conk back out, and then I could at least get some sleep in there. And maybe I was also used to just having less sleep because, you know, I had a toddler. So that was just overall easier experience. And I was just like, very grateful to have that. And I remember like at one point I got the same kind of thing. I got sick at some point, and I remember like it made me its blood tank, and I was really worried and, about like it was gonna like, okay, great, is it gonna mess me up and I'm gonna be the same position before. But, you know, and I don't remember if we supplemented at all. We might have some at that point, but I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna keep doing. I'm gonna keep nursing. And it came back, and it was okay. But, you know, it's really easy just to like jump into like, oh, it's going to go terrible. It's going to have the same, you know, it's going to have the same problems. But, you know, and then with her, like I knew she was going to go to daycare because my son was in daycare at the time. And I knew that was like what we're going to, you know, I think it was like 4 months in. So I knew I was going to have to pump. And I did until she was 1. That was my goal. I'm like, okay, at least till 1. And then after that, we could just nurse when she wants to. And, you know, I don't have to worry about like sending it to daycare or she can at least regular milk. But I know like pumping too was like, I knew, you know, there's a possibility your body's not going to respond to a pump like they do to a baby. So I want to say I didn't make enough just pumping. Like I would always like pump first thing in the morning just to get some extra. And then throughout the day when she was at daycare, but I didn't. Again, I had been supplementing some at the end, but I still felt guilty about that. But I was just like, you know what I'm doing everything I can. I am trying. I am pushing myself. So like, at least, you know, I could have just not bothered when she was in, you know, I'm not bothered with the pumping part, but, you know, was like, she nursed great. Like when she get back from daycare, she just like went to town and passed out. So that was nice. It was like, hey, I still can do this. It's just like, okay, my body doesn't like the pump. Yeah, who does? But so it's just, I don't know how women do it that only pumps. I couldn't but yeah, it was nice. And then around 1, we just she would nurse when she wanted to. Obviously she was on solids and whatnot. And then I think at a point where I was like, okay, around 18 months, I kind of was like, I would sort of offer it to her. She wasn't like one of those kids that was like terribly attached to it. Mm-hmm. And I would sort of just like offer it. And I remember at nighttime, it was like, we always do that before bed. And then I was sort of just like, well, maybe I'll just, because she, at that point, she could actually, it was cute. She was late 18 months or so. She'd say booby. And I was like, well, okay, why don't I just like see, I won't offer it, but see if like if she asks for it, like if she, if she's old enough, she can ask for it. And she kind of just stopped asking for it. And I was like, okay, I think it's a good spot. Like, we made it this far. I was really grateful we did. And I was going to let her kind of decide, because I didn't want to feel like, some kids are really attached to it. And then you feel like you have to take it away from eventually or whatever. Not, I don't have to, but like, I know, like, I didn't necessarily want to be that. So I was like, okay, I felt like it was a good natural end, whereas like she kind of made a decision. I didn't want to feel like I was just doing it for me either. I mean, nothing wrong with it, I guess, but I was like, okay, well, I thought it would be more like climactic, but it just kind of stopped one day, and I let her ask, if she wanted it or not, and she just kind of stopped. So I was like, okay. So, but yeah, I mean, I was, I guess I was definitely grateful to be able to do that for her and for myself, because I didn't get to that way I wanted to with my first. So
I love that you mentioned that you did it for her and for yourself. Do you feel like that second experience brought healing and helped you feel like, okay, I'm not broken. I can't do this.
Yes.
Something went awry with the first experience. I can't quite pinpoint what it was, but I know that I can do this.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was both. It was nice to be like, yeah, I can do this. I can actually do it. Because I remember feeling in awe of women that could, and being like, how? Or even I couldn't, because myself was very particular about like positions and all that. And I wouldn't even dream to try to do it in public. I was too nervous. And also just like, he was not one that just could just do it very easily. So I don't want to be thrashing around and worrying about that. So I never really bothered with her. It took me a little bit of courage to finally like start trying, but I could do it. Like I could do it in public. Like that was like scary in some ways, but I remember feeling like, hey, I can send milk with her at daycare. And I would always do the math of like, I'm away for her for this many hours. I go pump. I'm not going to be able to produce as much as she needs in those. I just know I won't.
Yeah.
So like, I'd rather have her with me. I can nurse her and she'll get what she needs. So I was very, very protective kind of that relationship, because I knew it was not easy. And that was the other thing too, is like, I realized like it made me forgive myself of the first experience, because I'm like, hey, that was a really challenging experience. Like, I know that, comparatively speaking, to experience that went a lot better. So a lot of things are out of your control. And I realized that, I beat myself up a lot about it. It's a hard time in general for any woman, I think, postpartum and all that. And then you have a difficult time with breastfeeding. Like, it's okay. I was able to like forgive myself. It's not some horrible thing you did.
No.
Yeah, right. It did kind of help put things in perspective.
What you said about people who haven't had a difficult experience, not understanding, they just can't, right?
No.
They just can't understand how difficult breastfeeding can be for some people. And so for you to be able to say, now that I did have an easier experience, I can look back and say to my old self, you didn't do anything wrong. It was just a hard experience.
Yeah, there's so many things that, again, they're just out of your control. And, that's why, it's like, having more support and, actually physically seeing it and being able to have more of those discussions and giving women a more that support, because it's not easy. It's like, if you have the ability just to like only focus on that. And I was split lucky in a lot of ways. I've had the ability to like take enough time off work, and I just took some time unpaid and then some leave and whatnot. Also, just if you don't have that ability to sort of like only just spend that time just focusing on nursing as much as, as the baby wants, it's hard, because it's like, it demands a lot of, especially in the beginning, it demands a lot of your time. And I remember my friend was like, it's like a full-time job. And I'm like, that's more than a full-time job. Cause it's just, that's kind of like all you're doing. And that's the other thing too, is like, I didn't necessarily realize how much the baby would want to nurse in the beginning. And that was like, also, it's a concern of like, oh, am I doing something wrong? Is he getting enough? That's why he's wanting to nurse all the time. And it's like, no, that's what they do. And that was sort of, it did help to have that perspective going into the second time to know, like, she does nurse a lot. And especially in the evening. And it's just going to be what I'll just be on the couch. Like,
Right.
when you find me, like, I was just going to get a little messy.
Exactly.
It's okay, but that's important to establish it. So like that did help having that like perspective. Yeah.
And when baby is nursing around the clock all the time and it feels okay, that's one thing. But
Yes.
when every time you know it's going to hurt, that
Yes.
adds to your anxiety around breastfeeding. So if you're already having a lot of postpartum anxiety, to know that you're going to be dreading every nursing session, it just makes it exponentially worse. So
Oh, yeah,
when
for
you're in
sure.
a lot of pain and nursing happens every 1.5 to 2 to 3 hours around the clock, that's a lot of anxiety that builds up because it's not just during the nursing session, it's the anticipation of, oh my gosh, it's going to be happening again. He's going to be hungry again. How long is it going to last? And so it's like all day that you're cycling through, not just the normal postpartum anxiety, but also the nursing anxiety when it doesn't feel good. Because especially when the messages you're getting from other people are, it's this beautiful thing. It creates all this bonding. It's the most beautiful time I had with my son. I wish I could go back. And for you, it's like, oh my gosh, this is awful. I hate it.
At one point, I remember, especially in the very beginning, people would be like, I love people when they want to ask you, like, when are you having another one? I'm like, this one just popped out. Like, are you kidding me? But I remember even feeling for a good few months there, like I always wanted to. My husband was kind of like, I'm okay with one because he's the only child. I'm okay with one, but I'm open to two. And I was like, I want two. But I remember feeling like for a few months in there, that I was like, I don't think I want another one. As time went on, I think I got a little bit more perspective. And, when you start having some sleep and no semblance of order and there was a lot that first year, just trying to figure out schedules, trying to figure out childcare, trying to figure out your my hormones and all that and sleep. And once we got like better, I was like more inclined to want another one. But I feel for people that really struggle with that because it's scary. And some women have just, hear postpartum psychosis and stuff like that. And the fact that we just have like no maternity leave and whatever. And it's like, I don't think you really just like go through it, like how much like it really messes you up physically and psychologically. I mean, it's beautiful. And, I had those feelings too, but like, I didn't know because no one talked about it really.
Right.
And so,
And you don't know who is safe to call either.
Because that will understand.
Right.
Yeah. That was a thing too. I remember, my mom didn't really get it. Because I remember telling her, I was like, when I went to the doctor eventually and was like, this is really bad. And she, he wanted me to be on, like, I'd give me antidepressants. And that was a hard one. That was another hard one, sort of like, accept that, like, okay, something wrong with you. You shouldn't have to do this, whatever BS our culture tells us. But my mom was sort of like, she's one of those that doesn't really believe in all that, which is whatever. But like, I realized like, she's not going to understand. Of like, she's like, well, what are you anxious about? I'm like, it's not how that works. I wish it did. I wish you could just be like, I'm worried about X and I could just stop. No, I couldn't. But I will say I'm very grateful for the fact that I remember one day I was like, I hadn't slept the night before. I had barely, and not because of the baby. It was just because I physically couldn't sleep because of all my anxiety. Like, and that really set me off into like a worse like mental space. And I remember I was worried about like, I was with the baby alone and my first, and I was like, am I going to be able to take care of him? And I eventually, like, I was worried about dropping him literally. And I remember calling up my mother-in-law. I remember saying this. I didn't say anything else. I was just like, I can't. And she just came over. Wow. She took care of him. My neighbor, she was like more of a supportive person I could just talk to because she had went through some of the same things. And I went and talked to her, and it was nice just to like get a break for a minute and just having somebody that's be like, not going to judge me. We just expect women just to like soldier on. Like, yeah, you should just be happy. And
right. And didn't you want this? Yeah. Didn't you want this baby?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. You do. Of course I love my children. Of course I want to be with them as much as possible. But like, there are times where like, yeah, it's a lot and I want a break. I miss sometimes the time before children because my husband and I could actually spend more time together and like whatever, like I can have those feelings, but still very much love my children. Like you can have multiple feelings at once.
Right.
And it's just almost like to shut women up of like, well, you shouldn't complain. because you're
Right.
beautiful
Stop
children. I'm like, of
complaining.
course I do. I'm
Right.
very grateful. Yeah.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Well, Katherine, as we close out, I thank you so much for opening up and being so vulnerable about your postpartum experiences. I know so many people are going to hear it and say, yes, you hear so many people talk about bonding immediately with their baby. But I know so many other people, they hold the baby and they think,
What is this?
I thought I was supposed to bond with this thing.
Yes.
So
My friend described it as she described her daughter as a crying alien. And I'm like, yes, that's how I felt. Like, I mean, yes, I love him. But on the other hand, it's like, what is this?
exactly. And I think both experiences are totally normal and it's fine. However you feel is how you feel. And it's okay if both people are good moms.
Well, yeah, for sure. For sure. And it's,
We all take care of our children. We all help them thrive. It doesn't mean anything. Your feelings are just your feelings. And I love that you reached out and got the support that you needed. And so I thank you so much for sharing your experiences.
oh, thank you for having me.
Awesome.
Today, we heard a story of healing through a second chance at breastfeeding. We also heard the story of someone learning to go a little easier on herself and realizing just how difficult her first experience was by way of having an easier second experience. Not every breastfeeding experience is created equal. I would love to continue this conversation about bringing more compassion to lactation practice and more healing to our own postpartum and breastfeeding journeys in my growing Facebook community over at the Milk Making Minutes community group. Let's continue this conversation so that we can be more supportive of people who struggle to breastfeed their babies and more supportive of people who want to breastfeed. If you know someone who could benefit from hearing this vulnerable conversation about severe postpartum anxiety while breastfeeding, please take a second to share the episode with them. You never know how it might impact them.